Shu, Kinamagan Nene Ireland Indigenous, and welcome to this production of Social Studies Explorer. Today's presentation, Chapter 6, Section 10, The Treaty of Paris. This lesson will conclude Chapter 6 of the Michigan Open Book Program. It'll feature a link in a discussion of a page from the History Channel and a video from History Brief. The war ended in Yorktown, but the British and Americans needed to end it officially. Both countries sent diplomats, also known as officials to represent the government, to Paris, France to negotiate, talk over issues, and reach an agreement on this treaty. That is why it is called the Treaty of Paris, because it was signed in Paris. It took them about 2 months to reach an agreement, and the chart on the next page shows the impact of the treaty. So let's take a moment to look at the Treaty of Paris from the History Channel. Treaty of Paris of 1783, because there's been more than one treaty signed in Paris over the history of the world, formally ended the American Revolutionary War. American statesmen Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay represented the Americans. And it came after the Revolutionary War and was really kind of pushed on by the surrender of Cornwallis at Yorktown to Washington and Rochambeau. Originally, there were 5 members assigned to visit over to visit Paris and negotiate. However, Thomas Jefferson and Henry Lawrence could not make it. Jefferson couldn't leave, and Lawrence ended up in the Tower of London. If you're not familiar with the Tower of London is, it's a prison. Franklin was an instrumental person in this, and Ben Franklin, one of the founding fathers that never served in the presidency, was our chief diplomat. It means he had spent a lot of time wooing the French and trying to make deals, and had been doing this for a number of years. The British didn't really want this war to keep going either, but there was a disagreement. Britain wanted peace, but without having to recognize the U.S. as an independent nation, sort of defeating the purpose of this entire war. For some odd reason, sarcasm intended, the Americans didn't agree with that and said, no, we're going to be independent. We won the war. After the election of a new, more pro-American parliament, which parliament is their Congress, Great Britain finally gave in and accepted the terms of American independence. Here are some key terms of that treaty. Great Britain finally gave formal recognition to its former colonies as a new and independent nation, the United States of America. It defined the U.S. border with Great Britain, granting the Northwest Territory to the United States. Why should you care? Because you are standing in what is considered the Northwest Territory. That is the region of our nation that includes Wisconsin and Michigan and Minnesota and Ohio and Indiana and Illinois. That huge chunk. And that's, if you're wondering, like, well, Mr. Ireland, we're not in the northwest part of the country. Well, we were then. It's also probably part of the reason, you get the champions of the West in a certain school's fight song. It secured fishing rights to the Grand Banks and other waters off the British Canadian coastline for American boats, which is actually a really big deal. The Grand Banks is well known for its fishing, and, well, fishing is a major industry. It opened up the Mississippi River to navigation by citizens of both the United States and Great Britain. This was a concession that allowed Great Britain to continue to trade. Resolved issues with American debts owed to British creditors. British business owners still wanted to get paid for debts that Americans had owed to them prior to the war. And in many cases, this allowed for that. And it also provided for fair treatment of American citizens who had remained loyal to Great Britain during the war. Uh, we had sort of said, hey, since you don't want to be on our side, we're taking your property. And this allowed for that to be returned either at compensation or the actual stuff. I would like to say that the Treaty of Paris 1783 had kind of created a lasting peace between us and Great Britain. It didn't. Sorry. I said I'd like to say it. I didn't say it would be true. The British had refused to relinquish several of its forts in the former Northwest Territory, including here in Michigan. And we continued to confiscate property from citizens that remained loyal to the British, which resulted in other treaties and eventually still another war. All right, let's return here. So the Treaty of Paris, everything's great, flowers, unicorns, rainbows, right? Maybe not. The Treaty of Paris did impact different groups of people here in the United States. First, for loyalists, most loyalists fled to other countries at the end of the Revolution, specifically Canada. A lot of loyalists go there because you don't have to take a boat, and it's really not actually that far from Boston to Montreal or Ottawa. Loyalists who stayed in the New America sometimes were treated poorly. There is a rivalry that comes with multiple years of war. And although all of the colonists at one time viewed themselves as British, the ones who supported independence held a grudge against those who didn't. Native Americans, none were invited to the Treaty of Paris talks. Who wrote this? About the land that they claimed and had lived on for many years. And by claimed, I mean they'd lived on it for many years. This is a major flaw in the treaty, as Native Americans were in possession of the vast majority of the lands won from the British, including all of the Northwest Territory. Unfortunately, we'd continue to lose millions of acres of tribal land to the new government. And this shouldn't be a surprise, as one of the key events that lead us towards war was the Proclamation of 1763, where King George III had said, yeah, you stay over here. The Native Americans get that land over there. So once we defeat King George, it shouldn't surprise anyone that the proclamation was ignored. African Americans, most remain enslaved, and this will continue for about another 80 years. There were a few that won their freedom and some that would earn their freedom in other ways, but the southern states were keen on continuing to have this free resource. Some of the North were freed, but this took years to happen. Contrary to what you may think, slavery did exist in likely almost all of the states, including here in Michigan. It's not at the same scale as what you would see in the South, and a lot of the slaves in the North worked in factories or worked in homes as servants without a choice. In the South, because of the agriculture, there was a lot more incidents of slavery. African Americans began standing up by bringing their culture to America. I'm not sure if this was a begin thing or the fact that it literally came with them. It's not like enslaved Africans were, saying, hey, how about we go back and get our old culture? It came with people that were kidnapped off the coast of Africa and sent over here to a new world. Their songs, their beliefs, a lot of these things didn't change. And so I don't want to say that they begin bringing their culture to America. And I don't like that, in all honesty, that the word culture is in parentheses, uh, because their culture was their culture, just like our culture is our culture. And they absolutely had a culture. So probably not the best chart that I've ever had to present. Um, who do I email? There is a suggested student activity that I'm not going to require, and you're welcome to try to create this board game about the war. It could be a digital form or it could be a paper copy. Due to the time frame of the quarter, it's not going to be a required assignment. And finally, furthermore, most African Americans found out after the war that the freedom and equality they had fought for did not apply to them. Slavery continued in the United States for over 80 years. All men are created equal. Wasn't really applying to anybody but landowning white people, white males specifically. It's going to take a long time. And in fact, some of these issues of citizenship aren't settled until well into the 20th century, after World War I, where we have some of the final citizenship rules, including for Native Americans. Going to conclude here with a video from History Brief that kind of wraps up the Treaty of Paris.
Although Yorktown was the last major battle of the American Revolution, the war did not technically end with the surrender of Cornwallis's army. The British still held Savannah, Charleston, and New York. While a few minor skirmishes took place across the 13 states, the Patriot victory at Yorktown had convinced the British that the war was too costly to carry on. How did the American Revolution officially end? The United States and Great Britain sent delegates to Paris, France to work out a treaty. Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and John Jay represented the United States. In April of 1783, the American Congress ratified or approved the document, and on September the 3rd, 1783, the Treaty of Paris was signed, officially ending the war. By then, Britain had also made peace with France and Spain. The Treaty of Paris was a clear victory for the Americans, as Great Britain formally recognized the United States as an independent nation with territory reaching to the Mississippi River and from Spanish-held Florida to Canada. The British agreed to withdraw their troops from American territory and to give the Americans the right to fish off the coastal waters of Canada. The United States agreed to allow British merchants to collect debts owed to them by Americans, and the treaty also advised the states to return property confiscated from Loyalists during the war. With the treaty signed, General Washington resigned his command in the Army to return to civilian life at Mount Vernon. Soldiers returned home to their families, their bravery and service having made victory possible. Before their dismissal, Washington told them, "I most devoutly wish that your latter days may be prosperous and happy as your former ones have been glorious and honorable." On December the 4th, 1783, Washington said farewell to his officers at Manhattan's Fraunces Theater. 3 weeks later, he presented his formal resignation to the Second Continental Congress. One witness described the emotional scene. The spectators all wept, and there was hardly a member of Congress who did not drop tears. The American War for Independence, as much as a people's movement as it was a military one, ushered in a revolutionary idea of creating a government based on the clear principles of freedom and rights for its citizens. American liberty did come at a cost. Of an estimated 217,000 men who served, 4,435 Americans died on the field of battle, while another 17,500 died from wounds, starvation, cold, or disease. This would be the equivalent of more than 3 million Americans losing their lives in a war today.
We have now reached the conclusion of the discussion of the Treaty of Paris. You should return to your Google Classroom for today's assignment. If you have any questions or would like to discuss the content, please reach out to me during class or via email. Have a minute, Gijgat. Meanwhile, Bama P.